by this gentleman, Taniguchi-san. Okay, so and Dingley is one of the contributing authors. So he'll talk more about this book later on. As we mentioned just now, you know, if you have not pre-registered or registered for this talk, then I mean, if you have registered, yeah, you'll get a free copy later on. So please remember to pick it up. You got to sign it off as well. All right, because this copy is, I mean, this is fully funded by the Seoul National University. The Korean, Korean government. By the Korean government. Something to the tune of almost $200,000 US. Just to, you know, of course, it's not just this. They have paid the artists. You know, they have a lot of meetings, etc., etc. So it's a lot of money spent. And for those who you know, have this copy, now it's something that you cannot get. You cannot go to the bookshop and buy it. So this is only to be given out. You can't get it from the bookshop. So even if you have money, you cannot go to the bookshop to buy this. So please, you know, I hope you make full use of it. Don't take this opportunity. Once you get this book, you go straight away to eBay or Carousel and try to sell it away. Please make full use of it. And don't leave it in your bookshelf and let it gather dust. All right. So the whole idea is that you use this book, go out, you know, and hopefully you are able to also, you know, I'm sure when you go out on your outings, there'll be lots of people who maybe don't know anything about birds or very little about birds, and this is a very good way to show them, you know, this beautifully illustrated bird book. All right. So, in conjunction with the launch of this book, I also want to mention something about this coming weekend. All right, and which I hope you'll use this book, you know, in your outing you know, weekends on Saturday. But this particular weekend, Saturday and Sunday, is a special day actually. All right, maybe some of you may not know, but anybody want to guess what's the special occasion this weekend, May 12 and 13?
It's not Labor Day, but
World Migratory Bird Day.
Yeah, World Migratory Bird Day. All right, good. But sorry, I think you're registered, right? So you don't have a copy. All right. So, but this weekend is also Mother's Day, right? I think. Is it? This Sunday. Sunday. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So, you know, the whole idea of the World Migratory Bird Day is to raise, you know, the awareness, you know, about the threats faced by many of our migratory birds. Today, many of these birds are under threat. Well, I mean, under all kinds of threat. All right. So the whole idea of having this, you know, day is to raise the awareness about the threats, as well as the protection of the birds, as well as protection of the habitats, not just in Singapore but around the world. Okay. So I hope, you know, as a, you know, like a very symbolic, you know, you try to make use of this weekend. Take this book along, go out to the field. As I said, it's meant to be used, meant to be brought out to the field. That's what I call a field guide, not a bookshelf guide. I mean, it's a field guide. All right, take it out to the field, and you know, I mean, to Sungai Buloh or Kranji Marsh. I hope you see some water birds, and hopefully, you know, you see anyone in the public that you meet, some stranger, tell them something about the birds. Tell them, you know, show them the book. Hopefully, you get more people interested in birds. The more, you know, the merrier, obviously. All right. And also, I want to mention that this book, Dingley is part of it. All right. So later, you want to get his autograph, feel free. So he will talk more about this book as well as his topic about the bird migration. So I think maybe before I end here, I just want to read a little bit here about the authors here. So there's I mean, how many of you know Dingley? Or who don't know Dingley? Anybody? Wow, so I'm very famous. Everybody knows him, all right? But yeah, just you know, just want to read this part very interestingly. You know, if you the last page 270, it mentioned about you know, Dingley. I mean, currently he's with BirdLife International, all right. And in addition, he's a very important advisor for us in the bird group. He's our scientific advisor, giving us lots of inputs, lots of feedback, ideas about the activities, the events, and the paper that we write. All right, and he has traveled far and wide in Asia, and today he has first-hand experience with more than 2,200 species of birds in Asia. All right, just in Asia alone. But I think most of his travel is in Asia at the moment, at least 2,200. And I think one of the amazing things that he co-described one of the new bird species for science. All right, which means that it was has never been discovered, right? So first time someone is describing this bird. So this is a quiz. Who knows what bird Dingley described that was not known to science at that point in time? I was fortunate that I saw this bird, so-called, this is one of the few birds that I've seen that has not been given a name yet. So this is one of them. So anybody want to guess? It's found in the island of Sulawesi. One clue. Small little bird. Similar to grey streak flycatcher. Getting there? No? Alright, maybe, so we'll, no guess? No? Okay, then we'll keep the book for Dingley to give away later on. He'll ask more questions, and I'll leave Dingley to tell you more about his adventure in Sulawesi and bird migration.
I've
Alright?
quite last question for the quiz.
Sorry?
The question for the quiz is really fine. There's only one question.
Okay, one question.
Yeah.
Later on?
I will announce it at the end of the...
Okay,
Yeah.
alright. So with that, let's welcome Dingley.
Okay, thank you. I don't think I deserve applause even before doing anything, so I'm very embarrassed that you have given me that acknowledgement. But anyway, I'd like to thank all of you for sacrificing another of your Thursday evenings here. We are here today for two things. Actually, today we wanted to use this occasion to kill two birds with one stone. How is that possible? Because firstly, we have this project just completed with our colleagues in Korea, and then I had this huge pile of books sitting on my desk, and then I looked at the calendar and noticed that, oh, World Migratory Bird Day is coming, and so we tried to look at these two different things, and we put them together, and so we have this little event here today. So thanks again to all of you for coming. As Kim Chua has mentioned earlier on, this weekend is really special because even though it's not one of our public holidays, we have a very significant day for conservation coming soon. It is not on our Singapore government calendar, it's not on any calendar for any country's government, but for those of you who look at what's happening in the world of conservation, there's this event we abbreviate to WMBD. It does not represent weapons of mass destruction, but it represents World Bird Migratory Day. So some of you may be wondering, why do we have World Migratory Bird Day in May? You might be saying that, May, this is not the time when most of these migratory birds are around. I may have gone to Sungai Buloh and I didn't see any shorebirds. So what's the link, right? Why do we have the Migratory Bird Day at this time of the year? Well, actually, the rationale is that when this day was conceptualized by the United Nations, they were thinking of the day from the Northern Hemisphere's perspective. So if you lived in Canada, or if you lived in America, or if you lived in Japan, and if it was around May, that is around the time when all these birds come back to Japan, America, Canada, Europe from their migration. And people would see these migratory birds for the first time in 3 or 4 months after they spend their 4 or 5 month holiday in the tropics. And so it was decided then that we will have the Migratory Bird Day around May. But then, people start to realize that we need to be a bit more inclusive because the people who live in the tropics, they only see the migratory birds at the end of the year. So for example, if you're living in Singapore, you won't be seeing any migratory birds in numbers until, say, around August onwards. So the good news is that for the first time ever, we will have a second Migratory Bird Day this year. And that will be coming up in about 6 months from now. So do watch out for events in the NSS calendar because we will have events again to correspond with the second episode of the World Migratory Bird Day. That will happen in August. And that is an event that is supported by the United Nations Environmental Programme. So you will be seeing activities all over the world, not just in Singapore. If you were in Japan, if you're in Europe, there will be similar activities as well in October. So that is World Migratory Bird Day. So, without further ado, I'm not going to go into the talk proper. Today's talk is actually going to be really simple because the talk was designed to go hand in hand with the book that we were going to launch. And because it was also World Migratory Bird Day, we thought that it would be a good time for us to bring together people. A lot of you who are probably volunteers for NSS or all kinds of different activities to come together to have a little conversation about migratory birds in general. I don't think we have this kind of event before, so what I will do is I'll make this event really easy and relaxed. I'm going to spend, say, 20-30 minutes talking about all the science and the technical things about migratory birds. And then we'll keep some time for Q&A. In fact, the more Q&A the better, because we will be able to draw also from the expertise of all the various bird experts or researchers in the group. So I hope we are okay with this arrangement. All right. So we have World Migratory Bird Day today, but before going into the details of migration, I thought it would be good for us to have a little chat about what is migration in the context of animal. Now, some of you may be thinking that, oh, animals are moving around all the time, you know, like if I look at the Geylang myna, it will be here today and then it will fly to the next block next day, you know. Would that count as migration? So what is migration really? Now, there are many ways of interpreting migration, but from the scientific point of view, scientists have been thinking about these questions for a long, long time. It's not something that's new because for hundreds of years people have been looking at birds and people notice that birds appear at a specific time of the year. So scientists look at all these patterns and they try to put together all the things that they know from various parts of the world. And after lots of discussion and lots of debate, scientists come to the conclusion that migration of animals is not just the movement of animals in the simplest sense. There has to be certain definitions that capture the whole idea of migration. So to put it in layman terms, maybe to help you understand animal migration in general, if you could think of yourself going to work every day, traveling from your house to your office and to the food court and to your community center and back, from the scientific understanding, that does not count as migration. It usually have to involve movement at a larger scale, okay? And so that means migration is not just going to be about movements of 5 kilometers, 10 kilometers. In general, migration would involve spatial distances of more than hundreds of kilometers, and in some very, very extreme cases, birds are known to migrate for more than 9,000 kilometers in one single go. So if you can think of that as an analogy to your daily life, you can think of migration being you going on a long-term holiday in a faraway place. So you may not be moving around your house, your district, but you may have gone to somewhere like, say, Europe, and you spend a year or so there. So drawing that analogy back to bird migration, in the simplest understanding, bird migration could be understood as a long-distance movement of an organism. And because it's not just a phenomena that's restricted to birds, you will see that bird migration also have, should I say, migration in general is actually quite a widespread phenomena in the animal kingdom. So birds may be the animals that we are most familiar with, but if you look across the animal kingdom, you'll see that all kinds of animals are capable of migration. You will see that some insects are also migrating, some mammals are migrating, and you know that there are some of these whales that make very large movements from different parts of the world in response to changes in the season and the availability of various food sources. So that is migration in short. Many kinds of animals undertake migration, as I've explained. We now know that beyond birds, which are the best known group of animals that perform migrations, there are insects that also make very spectacular migration. The best known example probably is the monarch butterflies. Some of you who have been to the Americas may have the privilege of seeing that butterfly migrating. But in recent decades, we also know that certain species of dragonflies, they perform very spectacular migration. Not so long ago, there were people who were on their ships in the middle of the Indian Ocean. And out of nowhere, they suddenly saw thousands of dragonflies flying towards their ship. and they were really scared. But it was just that the dragonflies were passing over on their journeys from India to Africa. So we now know that many different kinds of insects are also capable of migration. Whales, dolphins, very well-known animals that undertake migration. Fish undertake migration. But birds are the best known group of animals that make migratory kinds of journeys. And from what we know of birds, nearly 40%, all right, 4 in 10 different kinds of birds in the world is known to undertake some kind of migration. Now, talking about migration of birds, when we go into the details, migration of birds is more complicated than we think it is, because there are many different reasons why birds will migrate. Now, the commonest kinds of migration that are undertaken by birds is in response to seasonal variation in food resources. So when you see a sandpiper on your trip to one of these wetlands in Singapore, they are there mainly because where they breed in the far north of the world, those areas in the far north of the world, especially in the Arctic areas, in the temperate areas, those areas they are subjected to very large seasonal changes in climate. So if you were, say, a sandpiper or a plover, many of them would spend their spring in the Arctic regions, mainly because during the spring and summer period of the Arctic, resources are in great abundance. You can imagine that if you were, say, on holiday in Norway or Finland in spring or summer, the sun never sets, right? You have nearly 24 hours of non-stop sunshine. Now, take a bit of the biologist in you and try to understand what could happen when sun shines for 24 hours a day. If you were a plant, or if you were some plankton that undertakes photosynthesis, that means that you could photosynthesize all day long. And that means that if you're a plant, you get so much nutrients. So from the bird's perspective, they will be there to take advantage of this huge abundance of food supply. So all your sandpipers, plovers, or warblers, or whatever, they would be there enjoying all this abundance of food. But of course, when the seasons change, the abundance in the food also drop. So going back to the far north of the world, where many of our migratory birds come from, as spring moves into autumn and autumn goes into winter, you will see that the amount of sunlight in the day becomes less and less. Less sunlight, less photosynthesis, and as a result, you have far less productivity in plants. So food becomes scarcer, and birds would have to move somewhere to get these things that they need. Of course, the other explanation comes from the a more complex phenomena whereby a lot of these animals they have inbuilt mechanisms in their body that causes them to respond to decreasing levels of sunlight. That is a far more complex phenomenon, and scientists are still trying to understand how that affects the behavior of all these migratory birds. So migration of birds. It's often understood as the long distance movement of birds in response to changes, seasonal changes in various food resources they depend on. Now, what we know about bird migration, of course, is often involving the north-south movement of birds. So birds that are living in the high latitudes will move towards areas in the low latitudes. But then there are also many different ways of migration, many different strategies of migration. There are cases, in fact, lots of different cases in the world, not just in Asia, whereby birds are moving from mountains to the lowlands. Now, for example, in the mountains, in winter, there'll be not as much food as they will get because of colder weather. So a lot of birds also perform these kinds of movements we call altitudinal migration. And of course, there are other strategies in bird migration that are linked to water availability and that kind of thing. If you want to find out the full complexity of different migration patterns that are used by birds. The book that some of you will get today would be a good starting point. And of course, you can also go onto the internet to look for information. So I've already talked about this, so I'll move on. Now, in understanding migration, I hate to go into all these details, but it's good for us to know a little bit more about migration and what are the different stages in an animal's migration. In general, when we try to understand migrations, we are trying to join three different dots together. The first dot, or the first component of migration, is the place where the animal breeds. That's a place where they lay eggs and then they raise their young. And of course, the end point of the migration is the place that they will spend their winter. So that's a place where they will not breed, but they will spend lots of time there looking for food when the conditions in the place where they breed is not so favorable. But of course, to get from point A to point B, you have to move through a lot of different places in between. And we call these places the stopover points, or the places that these birds refuel. So for those of you who are bird watchers in Singapore, I'm sure all of you are very familiar with this term called passage migrants. I don't know whether if any one of you are familiar with the term passage migrant. You will be out in the field, say in August or in September, and then you see a bird, maybe say a yellow round flycatcher, or some of you might be lucky, you go to Bulo and you see Asian Dowitcher, and then you come back in 2-3 days and they're gone, you know, and they're like, oh, where did they go? I thought they were coming here for the winter. Well, the explanation is very simple. These birds are here mainly to refuel, because they're going somewhere else. They've made a long journey. They have to stop for a while to pick up all the food and to fatten themselves on the migration journey. So these are the passage migrants that we know, and they are here at their so-called stopover sites. So if you wanted to understand the phenomena of bird migration, there are only three things that you have to put together: the place where these birds breed, the place where they spend their time during the winter, and then of course all the little intermediate points in between where they are stopping over to refuel and to feed and rest. Now, of the many different kinds of migration approaches that are used by birds, one of the most spectacular would be long distance migration, for the fact that they involve such massive journeys traveled by the birds. And one of the best examples of a long distance migrant we all know very well is this very humble, very drab looking bird we call the black-tailed Godwit. Now, black-tailed Godwit is for many years people didn't know where they were coming from. All right, for a long time, local people who were living in the tropics, people who were living in New Zealand, they would see these birds showing up on their coasts every winter, usually around the times of November and December. And people would wonder, you know, where did these birds come from? Even for many of us here living in the tropics, we will see black-tailed Godwits on and off, right? But a lot of us were not very clear where they came from. And of course, with all these new science and technology that is available to us these days, we are now better able to understand the movement of these birds, starting from simple few observations. In this day and age, we have more than just binoculars to observe birds. And in the last 10 to 20 years, what a lot of scientists have been doing is that they have been putting little tags on birds. So for many, many years, what a lot of scientists were doing were that to understand where these birds were coming from and how far they had moved and how much weight they will lose along their journey, what they have been doing was to catch the bird at some point in the journey of the bird and put a little metal ring on the bird. The ring would contain some information on where the bird was caught, some serial number so that you could identify it with the very specific. And then after that, once they have done all their measurements, they will just let the bird go and hope for the best that 1 year later, 2 years later, they'll catch the birds again. Of course, most of the time, you will never catch these birds again. 99% of the time, the birds will be gone forever because you don't know where they go. They might go here, they might go there, or they might just go to a place where there's no scientists looking at them or no one there to catch them back. So a lot of those birds were lost. We did get back a few bits of data here and there, but of course, this has changed a lot because these days, we have a lot of high-tech equipment to help us understand bird migration. So in the last few years, a lot of scientists have been using special equipment that would allow you to tag these birds real time as they make their journey across the world. So in the case of the black-tailed Godwit, it's only in the last 10 years we were able to understand the full migratory journey of these birds. So what happened was that in parts of Europe, parts of China, parts of Australia, scientists, they caught these birds and they were able to put a little piece of transmitting device on the back of the birds. They will stick these things on the back and then let the birds go. And then when the birds fly off, they were able to receive signals from the satellite system telling them where the bird has been moving. So over the years, we have collected lots and lots and lots of data. And we now know that the black-tailed Godwit is one of the most amazing migrants in the world. It flies such a great distance. For those Godwits that were seen in New Zealand, they would be the cases of extreme migratory journeys. Right? They would have flown a total of more than 10 to 12,000 kilometers each way. So if we add that distance together for each season, some of these black-tailed Godwits that show up in New Zealand, they will have flown nearly 30,000 kilometers within the whole year. So animal migration is really something that that amazes us. Now, moving on from the science, I think it's also good to have a sense and understanding of how we can conserve migratory birds and how we can put in all the little bits of information to understand migration from a big picture point of view. We know that birds are moving from point A to point B and via many little intermediate points in the middle. And a lot of scientists, they find migratory animals really hard to conserve because migratory birds are not like the kinds of birds that you would otherwise find in your country. So for example, a lot of birds we know are so-called residents. I don't know whether you are familiar with the term residents. So basically the term resident is to describe a bird that spends its time in more or less one place for much of its life. Now when you try to conserve these birds that don't migrate a lot, it's quite straightforward. Because when you want to conserve an animal, like birds that don't migrate, the key thing is that you want to ensure that those places where they live in are not disturbed or destroyed in the long term. But migratory birds, they pose quite a big problem for us because they're moving from point A to point B, and many of these birds, they move over so many different points across a very large area. We just find it very hard to conserve them because you could end up saying that, oh, I think this place is very important for the migratory bird, and then that place is very important for the migratory bird, but you forgot that in the middle there are 15 other places that they would have to pass through as they migrate from the north to the south. So they found that if you want to conserve the migratory bird, you do need to think about how to conserve them over many different places, over a large area. And after lots of thinking and debating, scientists came up with this idea called the Flyway Concept. The Flyway Concept is a simple concept for us to understand bird migration and to think of ways to conserve them in a coordinated way. So with the knowledge that we've gotten from bird migration, scientists were able to come up with 6 to 8 of these flyways, which basically captures all the different migratory birds that tend to move along this general region. So in the case of Singapore, we fall into this region that was described by scientists. The scientists call this region the East Asian Australasian Flyway. It's quite a mouthful, but the reason why it is called the East Asian Australasian Flyway is really simple. The explanation is that a lot of these migratory birds, they generally move along East Asia to Australasia. There are very, very few instances of a migratory bird in this region who would migrate, say, from East Asia to Africa, or say East Asia to South America. So when we try to identify some general patterns, generalities in the way birds migrate and where they will move along in those journeys, we find that a lot of them move along a very broad area in a very consistent way. And that is how the whole concept of a flyway came to be. So now we have more or less 8 flyways identified, ours being the East Asian Australasian Flyway. And that flyway, as you can see from this simple map here, is the largest in the world. It covers the largest area of land and sea and involves the most different kinds of migratory birds. So next time when you travel around this part of the world, appreciate the fact that you are in a part of the world where there are most kinds of migratory water birds, land birds, eagles and hawks. There are many parts of this region where migratory birds would spend their time. So many, in fact, we don't even know how many of them are out there. However, based on the contributions of thousands and thousands of bird watchers, scientists across the region, we know that while there are lots of these places where migratory birds move along the East Asian Australasian Flyway, there are a few sites that are more important than others. I mean, you would say that, oh yeah, Bidadari, there are lots of migratory birds. Oh yeah, at this point in Malaysia, there's a lot of migratory birds. But if you look at it in the broader sense of things, from East Asia to Australasia, we know that there are specific areas that are very important migratory birds. And some of these migratory birds congregate at these areas, making them really important for certain groups of birds in general. One of the best known of these